Looking past the superhumans and the people of the past, it comes down to the ordinary people of the present to rise up against any and all threats that might plague them. Today we'll be looking at 3 specific fictional examples of ordinary humans rising above their station. The Helldivers, the ODSTs of Halo, and the guardsmen of 40k. All 3 of these factions are filled with humans fighting for their lives against vastly superior enemies, usually in terms of equipment and strength, sometimes even numbers. We're going to narrow down both the pros and the cons of each of these specific factions to help outline what would be the best and worst army to serve in. Spoiler alert, none of them are good to serve in.
Yes, but of course, to make sure this video isn't 3 hours long, we'll have to generalize and group together a lot of things. It wouldn't be good to list every single enemy in Warhammer, or every single flood infection form from Halo. We'll also have to generalize things because the life of everyone in these factions can vary vastly. Guardsmen could spend a lifetime on a ship before they ever even see any type of action, and ODSTs can be lost and abandoned on a planet somewhere for decades. Whether that means surviving in the wild or having fun in small cities, who knows? In regards to Helldivers, however, some die immediately while others go on for many operations, as well as having the small chance of sleeping through the entire war in cryosleep and then waking up a big hero. To start everything off, we'll begin with the youngest faction, the Helldivers.
Helldivers are an interesting case. They have an amazing variety of weapons, armor, and stratagems at their disposal, making them the faction with the most support and backing of any other on the list. They even have up to 25 reinforcements available to be dropped on their position at any time, this being up to a full squad of 4 at a time. If each faction was in a direct fight one-on-one, the Helldivers could just sit behind cover, lobbing 500 kilogram bombs left and right, and then call a mech on top of that. So the Helldivers are by far the best equipped on average. They also have the best radar, and have access to magical healing stems that can repair almost any wound outside of death. They also have near complete freedom to do as they please in the objective as long as they stay within a certain area. Overall, being a Helldiver sounds like an extremely cushy job as long as you don't worry about the stabbings, the acid burns, getting crushed, getting turned into a flesh monster. It's a pretty nice gig.
Yes, you are respected, you're given good equipment, and plenty of resources. Of course, there are some very big downsides to being a Helldiver as well. First of all, even though you're better equipped than your opponents on average, Helldivers are trying to fight a 3-way war in which they are fighting 3 separate species of aliens, potentially trying to wipe them out, enslave them, or eat them. Each different species with their own tactics, weapons, and horrors that they are ready to unleash upon the Helldivers and their allies. Terrible things such as the Hive Lord, which we have currently no real ability to properly fight off, and for some reason has gotten 7 times bigger than the first game. There are other things that are only found in Helldivers 1 that will probably soon be implemented in Helldivers 2. Things such as the Great Eye and the Siege Mech. Both things that, if they added at the posting of this video, would even further ruin the game, because we don't have anywhere near the firepower to deal with them. Not only that, but they don't have the armor to withstand any severe attack, getting instantly killed or fatally wounded by nearly any of the tougher enemies.
And sadly, after they won the war in Helldivers 1, they shut down nearly all of their factories and other military manufacturing operations, meaning that in the current setting of Helldivers 2, we don't have multiple different kinds of mechs, tanks, armored vehicles, and stratagems. On top of that, all of the previous enemies from the last war have come back, evolving bigger, better, and stronger. Except for the Illuminant currently, where it just seems like they threw some civilians with swords, a few jetpack people, and 7 zombies in a trench coat at the Helldivers. But regardless of that, they are still winning. Another negative for the Helldivers is the fact that the freedom they're allowed in missions can be used horribly against them. Overseers do not care how the mission is done, all the way up to the point of condoning friendly fire. There is no punishment for taking out other Helldivers during a mission. And this leads to the Helldivers' massive mortality scale, at a higher rate than even the ODSTs. Although they have a bunch of equipment, the threats they fight are dangerous enough to the point of making this video. Over 4.8 million Helldivers have died fighting in this war, and we're less than 2 years in. Worry not though, if you survive a mission as a Helldiver, you'll be extracted and put aboard the ship. But only to be thrown into another mission, into an infinite loop where victory or death awaits you continuously.
And death can find you in many ways while being a Helldiver, especially with the myriad of hazardous planets and storms. Some examples include fire tornadoes, meteor storms, earthquakes, freezing temperatures, scorching temperatures, and other similar problems. Lastly, the thing that might hurt some of the most for the Helldivers is the fact that their glory days are behind them. They're trying to reclaim their galaxy, and they are trying to fight off their enemies once again. The 100 years of peace that they had is now gone, and they may never see it again.
ODSTs are your budget super soldiers. They don't have any special abilities or enhanced strength, but they're significantly better than your average UNSC soldier. Think of them as 7th gen Spartans. Don't forget that they get worse every generation. Just like the guardsmen in Warhammer, they may be somewhat basic soldiers, but they still have an amazingly important role as special units in many ways. If we didn't have the Spartans, we would have lost the war in a few years. Maybe more, maybe less. But if we didn't have the ODSTs, it would have been a complete wash the entire time, as they vastly outnumber the Spartans, which therefore means they can do thousands of times the amount of special missions that Spartans can do. They just do them a little bit slower and a little bit worse. Overall, they have access to all small, medium, and some heavy pieces of UNSC equipment. They have most things from assault rifles to rocket launchers in their standard kit. That, and they also have pretty decent armor, surviving in some cases hits from brutes. They also have pretty good radar, night vision, and in some cases AI to help them along in missions. Now that part's pretty rare, but it's a boon nonetheless that can happen.
Now, it depends on the battlefield, but they generally have access to quick transport. Not just from the UNSC, but they are also trained to use Covenant vehicles when the need arises. Lastly, as one of the biggest positives, is the fact that they won their war, the Covenant War. They won it, and it is over. Now, to put a sad point on it, it's not really because they fought them off or were better than the Covenant, but more so that the Covenant kind of just imploded from the inside out after God's favorite child, Master Chief, went rampaging through their entire fucking army. Being an ODST, however, isn't always what it's cracked up to be. They are very commonly dropped into suicide missions and overall have a rather high mortality rate. On top of that, if you were an ODST during the war, it was 28 years of constantly losing objectives and doing your best to fight against a superior army. There's also something called the Cole Protocol, which means you can't return home and you can't keep any of the enemy's tech. You can use it on a mission, but you cannot take it back with you under any circumstances. This also isn't Helldivers, where ships sit in orbit very peacefully for the most part. There is fighting on the ground, in the air, in space, and probably in the fucking water at all times. If the UNSC loses the planet, you are on your own if nobody is able to extract you.
Speaking of being valuable, you will never get anywhere near the same amount of recognition the Spartans get, no matter what you do and what you accomplish. You'll just be put in a memorial somewhere, and most of the Spartans, at least the important ones, will get whole statues dedicated to them. Also, unlike the Helldivers, where you have a chance of surviving depending on the enemy, the Covenant is out for blood and eradication. You are fighting a war that isn't just about freedom, but about survival of your species. Sadly, also, you're not ignorant of any of this. You know that you're outgunned. You know that you're outmanned. And since you're the main line of defense, your morale is always going to be terribly low. This is because the only things that'll help you are typically Spartans. And if Spartans show up en masse, you're probably already dead, especially if it's Master Chief. Lastly, and probably the worst downside, is the fact that the Spartans have 5 games of their own, and you only have 1. And at this rate, the rate that Halo is dying, you're only gonna ever have 1.
Warhammer is a cruel and unusual universe filled with horrors much worse than anything seen in Helldivers or Halo, unless you consider the Flood, but that's a different conversation for another time. That's been done to death, but whatever. And just because of that, doesn't make it automatically the worst army to serve in, because there are many upsides to being a guardsman of the Imperium. The first being, to you at least, God is backing you. The Emperor of Mankind has his hand on your shoulder, pushing you towards the gun line and blessing each of your bullets to hit the target. Now, you are expendable. That is very true. But in this case, you are expendable in a good way, as you have so many different guardsmen backing you that you'll drown most of your enemies in a tidal wave of bodies. A wave so big that outside of Chaos, the Necrons, or the Tyranids, you are the biggest kid on the playground, having the best equipment of any faction technically. In some cases, you may just have a lasgun, which can be amazing due to its ability to be hooked up to a power pack for nearly infinite ammo. But you can also have a million other tools to deal with the enemy. You could go from bayonet charging demons to serving as security guard inside of a Titan. Sky's the limit.
Now, there's no exact number, but under the banner of the Imperium, they have up to 1 million worlds. Meaning that while yes, many guardsmen get the short ends of the stick, there are many cases where they live objectively pretty good lives. Some even making it to old age. Many people in the Imperium can live in hive cities, miles below towering skyscrapers, with mutants and other creatures, never seeing the sun even once in their lives. Going from that though, they could possibly serve on pleasure planets that don't get attacked for hundreds of years, and that's definitely an upgrade. It's either this, or they go get sent to fight in a war, one of many in 40k. Then, they could get stranded on a Tau planet, where they live a fairly peaceful life. That, or they could lose contact and go floating around in space for a few hundred years. It's been known that sometimes certain ships can be forgotten, and just hover around in space so long, they can develop new languages and cultures. But, back to the terrible parts of being the guardsman, one of them is the fact that you're extremely expendable. This one was listed as a positive before, but it also can be a downside. They could abduct, train, and subsequently kill everyone in a 4-block radius of you, and they would still have plenty of guardsmen to pick from after that, as hive worlds can hold is sometimes 1 trillion people, and in other cases hundreds of billions.
Now, ignorance may be bliss, but it does not change the facts. One of the facts is the fact that there are a minimum of 4 other gods against you, preying on your downfall and actively sending their own troops against you. Don't worry though, it's not just the gods, but also almost every other alien race in the galaxy. Funny enough, you are the smallest and the weakest of almost any of them comparatively. Now, partially, also because there are so many of you, you're given the bare minimum of equipment, armor, and firepower. Depending on training and situations, you might be working artillery or using different types of super weapons, but it is far more likely you'll be given a generic flak vest, helmet, and a lasgun to go die in. This standard gear will not protect you from even the smallest caliber bullets the enemy will be shooting in your direction. Also similar to the Helldivers, you fell out of your golden age, except instead of 100 years ago, it was 10,000 years ago. And a while ago, your god got fatally injured and is now stuck in a chair powering literally everything important in your army. Some other negatives in a bit of a rapid fire here. You'll never see your family again, you die in mass on top of the fact that said death may be very long and torturous, and to make it so much better, some of God's angels and children are no longer on your side, which is another way that you might horrifically die. Like when one of God's fallen children, Angron, despite not having a digestive system, ate a guardsman. He didn't do it for food, he did it for fun. The final part is the fact you are basically in an infinite war with everyone around you. This galaxy has been in war for millions of years, since the birth of humanity and even before that. And you better bet until every star burns out that there will still be war raging on.
So now that we've listed the pros and cons of each faction, I'm sure you're wondering which is truly the worst to serve under. First of all, let's start with the best to serve under in our opinion, that being Helldivers. The fact that they had 100 years of unfettered peace and growth alongside the fact that they're not fighting many new things, mostly just old enemies that they've already beaten. Comparatively, they're not having a terrible time. Again, they have amazing equipment and seemingly in every aspect have the space superiority, allowing stratagems and other equipment to be dropped mid-mission. This makes it so Helldivers are never truly alone, and when you win the war, not only will you be welcomed back with open arms, but you'll probably have an amazing severance package. Or probably a bullet to the head depending on the circumstances, but still, overall I would give the Helldivers a 2 out of 5 on the hellish scale. There's typically no major orders from high command saying that you have to go to the hardest missions every time, or any of the time for that matter, typically. So you could be doing easy missions all the way through, coasting through your military career and having a very good chance of surviving.
And now we move on to the middle child, the ODSTs. Overall, they were in a terrible state for 90% of the war, being put into unwinnable situations and trying to push back against a nigh unbeatable enemy. May I remind you that if they would have won, not only would the Covenant have wiped out all of humanity, they would have wiped out all life by activating the Halo rings. In another reality, the Flood win, and everyone is turned into Flood. Nobody wants that. There are so many events in the timeline that went perfectly so that humanity could just barely survive. Being an ODST was miserable the entire time they were deployed, and I am sure it is a bittersweet victory to many of them, as not only were most planets glassed or destroyed in other ways, but on top of that, they only won because the Covenant shot themselves in the foot with a civil war. So yes, it probably feels good that they did survive, but they only survived because their enemies tripped on their own shoelaces. So we decided to give the ODSTs a 3.5 out of 5.
And thus we move on to the guardsmen. Technically overall they are the worst, but you could also argue that they're the best in some ways. Again, we've listed that they are fighting threats on a much greater scale than the other two combined, and get into situations that guarantee their deaths, and that they will not be remembered in any significant way. But remember, depending on where you're put and where you are, you could have a cushy job and a basically free paycheck your entire life, not even really having to pick up a gun or fight a single thing, being a glorified security guard. Your greatest enemy being boredom and tiredness, and your greatest ally being the Emperor and coffee. We also went over the fact that you could be pulled from a terrible planet and deployed onto a much better one, maybe even an outright amazing one. So honestly, we overall decided to give them 2 ratings. One being a 5 out of 5 on the hellish scale, and the other being a 1 out of 5. Sure, on one hand, you could get kidnapped by Dark Eldar, getting tortured for hundreds of years and put into a pain engine, never truly dying but wanting to the entire time. On the other hand, you could be put onto an ocean planet, drinking martinis and having fun with the locals for the next 80 plus years, possibly even guaranteeing your kids a guardsman position on the same planet with the same cushy job. This is either a beautiful benefit or a terrible job, but it's usually just one or the other in the end.
So here we have the answer overall, above everything. Between all three of these factions, it's a bit of a mixed bag, with the guardsmen being both best and worst by an amazing margin in both directions. From getting tortured for hundreds of years to living carefree and relatively peacefully on a cool planet. While each of the other factions have a guaranteed amount of suffering that comes from their job. So realistically, we put the Helldivers as having the best time with their score of 2 out of 5, ODSTs being the middle child at 3.5 out of 5, and the Guardsmen being the worst overall at 5 out of 5. Mostly because of the fact that the suffering far outweighs any possible benefit from the Guardsmen. The ODSTs won their war, the Helldivers won their first war, so far, but the Guardsmen will forever be trapped in an endless downward spiral, fighting enemies that are not only limitless, but some that are beyond comprehension.